So without further ado, take it away, Vic.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Give me 1 second. Okay, are we all seeing that okay? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. All right, so this presentation is called Landlords, Leases, and You. It is your guide to living off campus. This will cover a great deal of information from your legal tenant rights, how to read a lease agreement, what should and shouldn't be in there, how to spot scams. So we're really going to run through a lot of different topics here today. There will be time for questions at the end. If you want to put them in the chat, I will go through them as soon as I'm finished with the presentation. But without further ado, hello, okay. All right, so first things first, if you're thinking about living off campus, there are some things that you're going to need to consider. The first of those being, how much can you afford for rent each month? What other expenses do you have? How does that weigh up against your income? What sources of income do you have, etc.? So that's something that you'll need to sit down and think about first. Next, do you want or need roommates? Some people prefer to have roommates because that does help to mitigate the cost. So if you can find a place with multiple bedrooms, it would be beneficial for you to be able to have roommates. I will just quickly say that the roommate portal on our website is currently under construction. We are hoping to have that launch very soon so that students who are looking for other students to live with can connect with each other. So that is coming very soon. I just don't have an exact date yet, but we're hoping to launch very, very soon. Next thing is, how far are you willing to commute? Something that folks who are coming from out of town don't always realize is that this university is not necessarily in a walkable location. So it's very rare that you'll find an accommodation within walking distance to campus. The campus is surrounded by highways, so it's really not the best for walking. We always do recommend that you have a personal vehicle if you're able to get one, but if not, there are several options for public transportation, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that in a minute. But public transportation is available to you depending on the area that you're coming from, so you'll just need to familiarize yourself with those options. You also need to prepare to be considerate of your neighbors. If you're living in a residential area, you're going to be surrounded by single-family homes, so you're going to be in pretty close proximity to other people. Even if you're in a commercial apartment complex, you are going to be in close proximity to others, so just be mindful of your noise, clean up after yourself, just basic considerations like that. If you have any animals, you'll need to think about that as well. Some units do allow pets, some do not. Some might charge an additional fee for that. Some have restrictions on what types of pets you can have, or specifically with dogs, what breeds of dogs you are and are not allowed to have. So it's just something to consider. Oops. Nope. Oh my goodness. What just happened? Why is this? Sorry, give me a second. Okay, sorry about that. Transportation. So again, a personal vehicle is recommended if possible, but if not, there are a few different options that you can choose from. One of them being the Long Island Railroad, or the LIRR for short. The Stony Brook train station is right here on campus, so that's the convenient thing about it, is that once you get to the Stony Brook station, you're already here, and there are campus shuttle buses that are included in your tuition that will come back and forth from that train platform to pick you up and take you to the various locations around campus. Side note, download the Double Map app if somebody wants to throw that in the chat. Double MAP, it's an app that you can download on your phone that will help you keep track of the shuttle buses around campus, where they're coming from, where they're going, where they're stopping, etc. So that's going to be a very helpful tool for you as you're kind of learning, how to get around campus and utilizing those campus shuttle buses. The most common question that I get about the Long Island Railroad is whether or not there is a student discount. Unfortunately, they do not offer that at this time, but if one ever becomes available, we will certainly let the larger population know. If you want more information about the routes, the schedules, the fares, etc., you would go to the MTA website. So that's new.mta.info/schedules, or you could just Google the Long Island Railroad and it should be the first search result. Your other option would be the Suffolk Transit Bus. You can find more information about that on the Mobility and Parking Services website. That's another department that we have here at Stony Brook. They have a closer relationship with external transit options. So I would recommend looking up Suffolk Transit Connection on the Mobility and Parking Services website, or you can go directly to the Suffolk Transit website. That's sctbus.org. You can look up the fares and the schedules, see where the stops are, and kind of weigh that out against the location that you're choosing to live. Then, of course, there is Uber and Lyft. These are very common apps that folks use all the time that connect passengers with drivers for ride-sharing services. It is a very common thing that people use, but I do want to talk about some safety considerations just in case you've never used it before. Maybe you're not super familiar. Not to scare you out of it or anything like that, but just so that you're aware of how to keep yourself safe out there. Make sure that you're always getting into the right car when you're using these services. Inside of the app, you should be able to see the driver's license plate number, the make and model of the car, and a photo of the driver. So those things should be provided to you in the app. You always want to match that up against the car that you're about to get into. On the driver's app, they should have your name. So before you get into the car, you want to ask the driver, who are you here for? Rather than saying, are you here for John? You should say, who are you here for? And have them tell you the name of the person that they're here to pick up. Make sure that that name matches your name. Always ride in the back seat, especially if you're riding alone. Always wear your seatbelt, of course. And if you can, share your trip information with a friend or a family member. Let them know the driver's name, license plate number, whatever you have access to in the app. Give them that information, as well as your ETA to your destination. If you ever do feel unsafe or you feel like there's some kind of an urgent situation unfolding, both of these apps, both Uber and Lyft, do have in-app features built in that will allow you to discreetly connect with emergency services, but you can also always call 911 as well. That is our emergency service line. So when you're shopping the market and comparing options, be mindful of the fact that our website, stonybrook.edu/offcampusliving, is the only website that is officially recognized and affiliated with the university. So I know that there are other websites out there, and it's not that you can't or shouldn't utilize them, but just know that our website is the only one that's recognized by the university. It's the only one that we really have eyes on, that we're affiliated with, that we operate that website, and we know what's coming in. The options on our website are all verified to be legal rental units, so that means that we have proof of legal rental permit. We know that they've been inspected by the town. We know that they're up to fire code. So, that baseline really serves to protect the students. Just beware of other sites or platforms that claim to be affiliated with the university. They're definitely not. This is the only website that is officially related to the university. When you're visiting properties and comparing options, we do have some renters checklists available for you on our website that you can print out if you're interested in that. Just things to consider as you're going around, things with regard to your safety, the exterior and interior parts of the building, just things to take note of that you might not have thought about on your own. So you're free to print those out if you'd like. They're in PDF format. I'm going to talk about this. A big red flag is when a landlord is not willing to have you visit the rental property. And I understand that as international students, visiting the property might not necessarily be feasible for you before you get here. So what I'll say about that is when you're looking at these rental properties and you see something that you like, I would recommend that you request a virtual tour from that landlord. And if they're not willing to provide that to you, then you should move on to something else. So you could video chat on Zoom like we're doing right now. You could use FaceTime. I think there is a video service built into WhatsApp. So, any really video chatting service that you're comfortable with, you can use. I would not accept videos from the landlord or photos, really. You would want to be doing that virtual tour in real time, the way that we're speaking in real time right now, just to make sure that everything matches whatever photos you've already received. It matches the description that you've received, just to make sure that everything looks to be in order, because things can be faked very easily. We're going to talk about a larger list of red flags in a minute, but you want to avoid something called a bait and switch scam, which essentially is when a landlord will either fabricate the photos of the space that they have, and once you get there you realize that it doesn't really look the way you thought it would, or in the absolute worst case scenario, the rental listing itself just isn't real. They don't have a property. They're stealing photos from somewhere and claiming them as their own, and they're trying to scam you out of fees or something like that. So just be mindful of that, and we will talk about that more in a few minutes. So a really common scam that's happening right now, especially prevalent in like Facebook groups or other apps and platforms, WeChat, Craigslist, things like that. It's like I'll kind of just describe it. Basically what's happening is kind of similar to what I said already. The landlords, or quote unquote landlords, most of the time they're not actually landlords. They will post photos of a rental unit that they're claiming to have available. Kind of seems too good to be true. Students will reach out to them and say, hey, I'm really interested in this property. I'd like to see it. I'd like to take a tour. And then the response that they're getting to that is, well, if you want to take a tour, then you have to pay us a fee. They might call it an application fee. They might call it a security deposit. They might just say it's a fee for the tour. They'll usually claim that it's refundable, which is what, kind of gets the students tricked a little bit, saying, oh, well, I guess if it's refundable, then it's not a big deal. And then you end up paying these pretend fees, and the person disappears and takes your money. And unfortunately, there's not really anything that can be done to get that money back. It's pretty much impossible to trace these people. You could file a police report if you wanted to, but very, very unlikely that you'll ever see that money again. So just be aware of that. You should absolutely never be paying any kind of fee whatsoever prior to, first of all, having seen the apartment. If you can't see it in person, then virtual tour like we just discussed, and signing a lease agreement that both you and the landlord have signed. You've read it, you understand the terms, you're agreeing to it. So those two things need to happen before any money is exchanged at all. It's a very common scam going on right now, so just be aware of that. Application fee and security deposit, those things are legitimate things that you may encounter throughout a legitimate rental process. They're using these terms to try and trick you, though, because they're aware that some folks maybe are not as experienced. They don't really understand the process. An application fee is something that you may not encounter every time. They're more common with commercial apartment complexes, and they're usually like $20, $30, and usually this is not happening until later in the process, after you've seen the place and verified that it's real, and you're saying, okay, I'm interested, I want the place, and then they're going to maybe run like a credit check on you or a background check or something like that. That's where the application fee comes in, and it's usually very minimal, but these folks who are looking to scam people are usually asking for like upwards of $100 to $200 up front, which is crazy. A security deposit, again, is something that you won't encounter until much later in the process of a legitimate rental. A security deposit essentially is like collateral money that a landlord will collect, again, after you've verified that the place is real and you've signed the lease agreement and you're ready to move in there and rent. You pay 1 month security up front. And we'll talk about security deposit a little bit later. I'll explain a little bit more in depth what that means and what that is. But just be aware that just because someone is claiming that these fees are legitimate, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are, especially if they're asking prior to you even verifying that the place exists in real life. Okay, I think I've beat that one to death. We'll move on to the rest of the stuff on the list. Overcapacity kind of goes hand in hand with that second to last bullet point, non-permitted bedrooms. So if you're kind of inexperienced, you don't really know what you're looking at, you might kind of miss this. Overcapacity is more common in like an accessory apartment or a whole home rental. It's less so with like the commercial apartment units. Basically in New York, legally speaking, generally you shouldn't have more than 3 unrelated persons occupying a rental unit unless they're operating as a family. There's some gray area there. There are some exceptions to the rule, but just as a general baseline, you don't want more than 3 unrelated people in a rental unit at one time. If you're walking through a house or what's called an accessory apartment, which is an apartment that is kind of an extension of someone's personal home, and you're noticing that there are things that kind of look out of the ordinary. Maybe they're trying to convert like a garage or an attic or a basement space to a living area, or maybe it kind of looks like one room may have been divided in half to create 2 rooms, to ultimately create more space so that the landlord can have more people in there and charge more money. If you're seeing things that kind of just feel strange and out of place, it's probably because that's the case. So go with your gut on that. But if you're seeing that, again, like a basement or an attic or a garage or something looks to have been converted to some sort of a bedroom or living area, that's usually not a good sign. Being asked to pay several months in advance is another red flag. Legally in New York State, a landlord cannot request from you upfront more than first month's rent and a security deposit that is equivalent to that rent. And again, we'll talk about security deposit a little bit later. But they cannot ask you for first month, last month, security, and any other random fees that they might try to throw at you. The only kind of exception to this, and this isn't even something that you'll encounter all of the time, is something called a broker fee. If a landlord is working with a broker, you can kind of think of it as like a real estate agent, just for our purposes. It's a third party that's assisting in the process of helping that landlord get a tenant into their unit. So sometimes you may have to pay a broker fee if they're working with a broker. It's not something that happens all the time, but that's really the only exception to the first month plus security rule. Payment required before documentation is signed by both you and the landlord. So if you don't have a written lease agreement that you have signed and the landlord has signed, you should not be exchanging any funds. You must have a written lease agreement. Don't ever agree to anything verbally. We don't encourage that at all. Standard practice is to have a written lease agreement that you have reviewed, you've agreed to, you've signed, the landlord has signed. That is standard practice. False advertising, bait and switch, we talked about already. Blocked exits or windows is a big safety hazard. It's a fire hazard. God forbid you ever needed to get out quickly. You don't want any of your options for exit to be closed off. So nothing blocking the doors or windows. Generators inside is another safety hazard. A generator generally, I believe, runs on gas, so you don't want that inside of your house to begin with. Even if you were to see one outside, it would kind of make me want to ask some questions, because if they're needing to pull energy from other sources, might be an indication that there's some overcapacity going on, or just in general that maybe there's something wacky going on with the electric and you don't want to deal with that anyway. Lack of smoke detectors is another one. Legally, a landlord is required to provide these to you, especially within 10 feet of rooms being used for sleeping, so like bedrooms. Just look around, and if you notice that you're not seeing the smoke detectors, you have the right to ask about that, or have the landlord, if you're doing a virtual tour, kind of peer up and show you that there are smoke detectors. If there don't appear to be any, you have the right to ask about that. Again, they're legally required to provide that for you. Our office does usually have a good amount on hand that we give out for free. Just let us know that you need one and we will have that ready for you. Non-permitted bedrooms we discussed. Exposed electrical wiring. There should be nothing sticking out of any of the sockets, nothing coming out of the walls, nothing coming out of the ceiling. So just keep an eye out for that. It's a bit of a safety hazard and just an indication that, again, something might be wrong there. You don't want to have to deal with that later down the line. And an unwillingness to formalize an agreement in writing. Again, very standard practice for a lease to be in writing. If a landlord is not willing to provide you with a lease, that's a pretty strong indication that maybe they're doing something illegal, or that there's just a weird situation brewing there that you don't want to get involved with. So never accept a rental agreement that is not in writing. Okay, a little bit of information about leases. A lease is a binding contract. It's a legal document that exists between the tenant or tenants, however many people are living there, and the landlord. Lists the obligations of both parties. It should always be in writing. Again, it should be signed by both the landlord and the tenant or tenants, whoever is living there. You should never, do like a verbal agreement. That will always result in misunderstanding, and there's no protection there for you. Common misunderstanding that a lease only exists to protect the landlord. That's not true. Lease exists to protect both parties, and there's nothing protecting you if you do not have that agreement in writing signed by both you and the landlord. There are different types of lease contracts. Not one is not necessarily better than the other. They're just different. A fixed term lease is a lease essentially that has a set expiration date, usually on an annual basis. So, usually your tenancy will end a year after you sign that lease. Could be more, could be less. It just depends on what you agree to with the landlord. You can renew this kind of lease if both you and the landlord agree to draw up a new contract at the end of your lease. But that's what that is. It's just essentially a lease that has a set expiration date. Self-extending lease is essentially the opposite of that. It's a lease that will continue to renew itself until either you or the landlord decide to end that agreement. If that ending of agreement is coming from the landlord side, though, they do have to give you proper notice. We're going to talk later on about eviction and, proper notice and things like that, because I know that that concept kind of tends to freak people out a little bit. There is something also called a month-to-month lease, or you may hear it referred to as tenancy at will. It's the same thing. Essentially, this lease is, it's preferred by folks who are looking for a shorter term rental. It's not necessarily bad if you're looking for a longer term rental, but just be aware of the terms of this lease. They are shorter. So the lease is renewing on a monthly basis rather than an annual basis, which is why it's preferred by folks who are looking to stick around for maybe like a few months and then they're going somewhere else. Just be aware of that. Then there's something called subleasing. Make sure that you're very clear on this with your landlord, what the terms are with regard to subleasing. But what that means is, let's say you're renting an apartment and maybe you're going to be going on vacation or leaving for, whatever reason for an extended period, and you want somebody else to come in and occupy that unit while you're gone. That person would then take on the rent, and technically you can collect on some of the rent that is provided by that other person. Just make sure that you're clear on those terms with your landlord. Make sure that you're discussing that openly with them if that's something that you're planning on doing. So now we'll talk about the actual content of a lease, what should be in there. So at minimum, names and addresses. You want your name, you want the landlord's name, and the address of the unit. You want to know what kind of lease it is, what is the term, when will it renew, when does it expire. The cost of rent, of course, should be in there. Utilities are sometimes included in the price of rent, sometimes they are additional. But if that's the case, either way, it needs to be very clearly outlined in that lease what is included in the price. And if anything costs an extra fee, it needs to be very clearly written out, clearly itemized. So, if rent is, $1,500 and then, cable and Wi-Fi are extra, it needs to list rent, cable is this much, Wi-Fi is this much. So you need to know exactly what it is that you're paying for. Security deposit, and again, we're going to talk more in depth about that, should be indicated in the lease. It should be the same amount as 1 month's rent. So if your rent is $1,500, your security deposit is $1,500, no more, no less. It absolutely cannot be more than that. They cannot ask you for more than that. Maintenance and repairs should be clearly outlined. We're going to talk about this in a little bit, but generally speaking, the landlord is responsible for general wear and tear. Tenant is responsible for any purposeful or accidental damage that occurs to the property. I put guests on this list because this is something that trips people up sometimes, especially if you're not really familiar with the legalities. A landlord is not allowed to dictate when and if you have guests. They cannot tell you that you're not allowed to have guests. They can't tell you that you're only allowed to have guests at certain times. They can't tell you that you can't have overnight guests. So nothing surrounding guests should be in the lease. It's not something that's legally enforceable. You're paying for the space. You're paying to live there. That is your home. Having guests is just considered, regular use of the space. You have every right to do that. I'm not suggesting that you cram, 100 people into a studio apartment and have a, giant party. That's really, that's kind of an extreme example. That's not what I mean by that. But, you're having a friend over or somebody's spending the night or a family member is visiting from out of town and they're going to stay with you for the week. These are all just regular, normal things that people do. You should not have any issue with that. The landlord cannot tell you that that's not allowed. Pets, again, is just something to consider if that's applicable to you. Make sure that it's very clearly outlined whether you can or can't have them. If there are specific kinds of animals that you're not allowed to have, is there an additional fee involved for the animals? And if so, that should be listed and itemized there. Description of the property, what kind of apartment are you renting or home? Is it a house? Is it an apartment? Is it a studio, 1 bedroom? What's the square footage, etc. And again, just making sure that everything kind of seems up to code. So, smoke detectors, no electrical wiring hanging out, no blocked exits, etc. So now we'll talk about what should not be appearing in your lease. I always say a lease should be a very straightforward, kind of boring document. There shouldn't be anything in there that is, really confusing to you, or that is kind of like, I don't know if that's right, or, anything that's kind of raising an eyebrow, as we say. So this slide here can be a little difficult for folks to understand. It's a little wordy, so I'm going to condense it a little bit and just kind of explain to you what these things mean. You don't want to have a lease that is one-sided in the sense that all duty to repair is being placed on the tenant. So what that means is, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, is that the landlord legally is responsible for what we call general wear and tear. So things that are going to happen inevitably, like, just as the property ages, as you're, living there, occupying the space for an extended period of time, things kind of break down or they need repair, or, just general everyday things that you might encounter. So, let's say there's like your hot water is not working, or an appliance isn't working the way it's supposed to, or something to that effect, just general stuff that you're going to encounter inevitably at some point. That is legally the the landlord's responsibility to take care of that for you. On the other side, and I'll use extreme examples so that you can understand the difference between the two. If you as the tenant cause some sort of damage to the property, whether it's on purpose or not, you break a window, you kick a hole in the wall, you rip up the carpet, you do something crazy and, really cause some sort of damage to the place, then that's your responsibility financially to take care of that. And that will come out of your security deposit, which again, I swear we're going to talk about it. But that's the difference between the two. You never want to have a lease that places all of the responsibility onto the tenant, whether it's, wear and tear or damage or whatever. So again, legally, the landlord is responsible for general wear and tear type of stuff. The tenant should only be responsible for, purposeful or accidental damage to that property. And there should be no room for any hidden fees in a lease also. As I said before, if there are things that are not included in the rent, they need to be listed very strategically. You need to know exactly what that thing is and exactly how much extra you're paying so that you have a total picture of what it is that you're giving the landlord every month. Before you sign a lease, you need to make sure that you understand the terms. A lease is a binding contract, so you need to make sure that you fully understand what it is that you're reading. It never hurts to have more than one person take a look at it. If you have access to a legal representative that can read it for you, definitely have them give it a once over. It couldn't hurt. If you ever needed access to legal services, by the way, and I'll mention this again a little bit later, we can put you in touch with free legal services in the local community if you ever needed that. A lease is negotiable. A lot of people don't know this, but you can make changes to a lease if you don't agree with something that's in there. So if you want to change something in there, what you would do is you would cross out the section that you want to change, write in what it is that you want it to say instead. You initial it and date it, the landlord initials it and dates it, and then that becomes the new term. If you want to just get rid of something altogether, same process, cross it out, and then you initial it and date it, landlord initials it and date it, and then that's out of the lease. So you always want to keep the most up-to-date copy of your lease for your records, just in case you ever need to go back to it for any reason. Again, legal concerns, if you have any and you need to be put in touch with a legal representative, nobody in our office is a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. Nobody here can really give you legal advice, but we can refer you out to people who are qualified to give you that kind of assistance. So there are free legal services that we have access to in the local community. There is something called the Legal Clinic here on campus that is run by the Graduate Student Organization. I believe they only operate during the academic year, so you might not be able to get in touch with them over the break periods, but we have resources out in the local community that are available all the time that we can put you in touch with. Once you sign a lease, you cannot be evicted without proper court process. This is something that a lot of people don't understand. Your landlord can never just knock on your door and say you have to leave. They can't, tell you that you have to leave in a week. They can't tell you that you have to leave in a month. They can't evict you without, proper court process. A true eviction is a legal court process, and it takes kind of a long time. So even if you were to stop paying your rent and the landlord is legitimately evicting you, from the point of being notified of your eviction to the point of actually having to exit the unit, we're talking about a time period of like roughly 3 months here. So you do have a little bit of time to kind of get it together. And again, they can never just throw you out for no reason. They can't prevent you from entering your space. If they ever were to try and illegally evict you, or change the locks or do something insane like that, unfortunately that does become a police matter, so you would need to call the police to assist you with that. If issues arise between you and your landlord, you always want to make sure that you're communicating in writing. So whether that's through mail or email or text or whatever, just make sure that you keep that handy for your records. And just make sure that you fully understand your rights here. Again, you can't be thrown out without proper notice for no reason. So, if that ever does become a problem, we're here as a resource to connect you to other outside resources, but you always have the option to call the police. Again, I'll just go through this. I know I mentioned already, smoke detectors are legally required. Landlord must provide them to you, especially within 10 feet of rooms being used for sleeping. They are legally required to provide them. If you don't see them, you have every right to ask. And if you ever did need one for any reason, our department usually does have them available to give out to you for free. Something that I don't think I mentioned earlier, I think I might have skipped this by accident on the list, but you have a legal right to privacy. So enormous red flag, never, ever, ever acceptable. Cameras inside of the home or the apartment, even in common areas. So even in like a kitchen or a living space that you're sharing with other people, a landlord cannot put cameras inside of your unit. If you see them, run the other way. It is not legal. They cannot monitor you in that way. Unfortunately, it is something that we've seen happen to students before. They weren't aware that it wasn't allowed, and then they come and talk to us and explain the situation, and it's just not something that you want to get yourself involved in. So if you happen to notice that, do not rent that property. It is horribly, horribly illegal. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about security deposit now. A security deposit, as I mentioned, is collateral money. This is this is money that a landlord will take in order to cover expenses that the tenant might incur on the property. So again, damage, whether it's incidental or on purpose, if you cause some sort of harm to the property, the money to fix that is going to come out of your security deposit. Security deposit must be equal to 1 month's rent, so never more than that. If your rent is $1,500, your security deposit is $1,500. The landlord will take this money and they're required to put it in a bank account within 30 days of receiving it. They should tell you what bank it's in, the address, the account number, and the amount of money that's in there, which should be the amount of money that you gave them. Security deposit must be returned to the tenant at the end of their tenancy if you've not incurred any damage that they needed to use the security deposit for, should be returned to you. A little word of advice about this is when you first rent your property, before you really move in and settle in there, I would recommend as soon as you get there to take pictures and videos of the premises, just to protect yourself. If you notice any like little imperfections or like there's a chip in the paint or something to that effect, you would want to document that so that later on, if your landlord is, doing an inspection of the place, when you're getting ready to leave and end your rental agreement, they can't say, oh, you caused this damage. You would have proof then, a dated photograph or a video saying that was there when I got here, like got nothing to do with me. So just to protect yourself, I would recommend doing that. In the event that any deductions are made from that security deposit, the landlord must provide you with a written receipt or sworn statement listing all of the damages and their associated costs. So they must give you that documentation. Always save that for your records. Again, just to reiterate, law requires that the landlord pays for ordinary wear and tear. Tenant is responsible for either accidental or intentional damage. So just make sure that you're reading your lease very carefully, make sure that you fully understand the expectations here, and that there's nothing in there jumping out at you that feels, wrong. I'll reiterate again, we can't provide legal advice, but if you were to, show us a lease agreement and say, hey, like, is there anything in here that looks like crazy to you? in a general sense, we can go through it and say like, yeah, this looks pretty standard, or like, I don't know about this. So, generally speaking, we can look it over for you if you ever needed us to. Renter's insurance is something that we recommend. It's not necessarily required. Sometimes with commercial apartment complexes, they want you to have rental insurance, but in a general sense, it doesn't tend to be something that is always required. It's just something that we recommend because if there is some sort of unprecedented loss or damage, something that you weren't expecting, fire, natural disaster, flood, etc., renter's insurance will help you kind of recoup some of the damage. So money that you'll be losing in the event of a disaster, renter's insurance will help you make that back. We don't have like specific recommendations. We don't endorse one brand over another or anything like that. It would be up to you to kind of do that research. It's very easy to do. You could just Google, renter's insurance options and kind of weigh out the pros and cons of whatever brands you're thinking about, compare prices, etc. It doesn't tend to be super expensive. It's usually pretty affordable. So it's just something that we recommend that you look into for yourself. Just some general community guidelines and social responsibility. There is something called the social host law. This is a law that states that you cannot allow anyone under the age of 21 to consume alcohol in your rental property. So the legal drinking age in the US is 21. If you are caught allowing someone under the age of 21 to consume alcohol on your property, you will face the legal ramifications for that. In general, I know I mentioned this already, but just be respectful of your community members, be mindful of who is around you, keep your noise level in mind, cleanliness, making sure that, you're keeping up with the curb appeal, throw out your garbage, clean up after your animals if that applies to you. And we always encourage folks to participate in community service if you're able to. And if you are eligible to vote, we encourage you to do that as well. I'm going to skip the website for now just to make time for your questions. So now we'll open it up. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and I will go through them and answer those for you.
Thanks so much, Vic. We know it was a lot of information to absorb. We know sometimes questions don't even come up until you're starting to explore some options and opportunities. So all of us are here as resources to connect with even after this. Again, we are recording this session, so we will be posting it on our YouTube page in the international admissions playlist, and probably even emailing it to all students not living on campus. But we have about 10-15 minutes for questions. So do let us know if you have any. You can even unmute yourself if you don't want to chat it. Well, I'm going to take that as Vic did such an awesome job to answer everyone's questions and give you a lot to think about as you're exploring your off-campus living options. And again, as you're starting to look and have questions that come up, you can always email admissions. Vic, is there a good number for your office or a good email address for your office that you can put in the chat?
Yeah, I'll put the email address in the chat as well as our general phone number.
Perfect. And then I'll just also put, of course, which you should have, the Stony Brook international admissions. So that I had just received a direct message. If I look for a house on Facebook group and I find a suitable place, what proof of documents can I ask them to check if they are scammers or real?
So again, if they're asking you for any kind of money up front, that is your number one indication that this is a scam. So always, if you're finding a place that you are interested in, again, I know that international students, it's more difficult for you to be able to physically see the space in person, but you need to, at minimum, be asking them for a virtual tour. So that should be your first question, is explaining, I'm an international student, I can't really get there to look at it, can we get on a Zoom call or, FaceTime or whatever platform you want, so that you can show me the space. And if they're unwilling to do that, end the conversation. If they're asking you for money to do that, end the conversation. It's definitely a scam. So any kind of money that they're asking for, I don't care what they call it. If they might, try and call it a security deposit, they might call it an application fee. They're going to claim that it's refundable. Zero money exchanged before you verify that the place is real and you've seen the lease agreement and signed it. So never, ever, ever be giving anyone money before those two things have occurred. If they show you the space and everything looks okay, you can go ahead with that agreement if you're interested in the space, but you need to ask for the lease, have them, give you a copy of that, look over it, make sure that there are no weird terms in there. If you want my office to look at it, we can. Again, I can't give you legal advice, but I can, in a general sense say, yeah, this lease looks pretty standard, or I don't know, there's something weird in here, I don't like that. So, we're here for you as a resource as well.
Great. So I got another direct message about checking rental sites, but there's not affordable options for me. What can I do in this situation? So I'll start that and I'll let Vic chime in. She talked a little bit about matching with roommates. You will probably need to look for someone to share options with. The campus is an hour from New York City. The cost of living in New York can be expensive. You know, renting something solo in the immediate area is equal, if not more, to living on campus. So it's not sort of a savings option. However, you can legally live with other people in appropriate spaces. And I'll just ask you to restate sort of how to perhaps find some roommate situations.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're really trying to get that roommate portal up and running as soon as we can. We had one and the software unfortunately kind of aged itself out. So we have the IT folks rebuilding a brand new platform for us for folks to use. We're hoping to get that pushed out very, very soon. So that will be like the official university platform that you can use to connect with other students when that comes out. In the meantime, I know that there are forums that exist. There are, Facebook groups and, pages where students do congregate, and you can interact with folks. You can make posts on those groups and say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm looking for this kind of arrangement, and see if anyone is interested in connecting with you. But again, you want to be using your best judgment. There are safety guidelines that go along with that. Anytime you start interacting with a new person, you want to do a video call with them prior to ever meeting them in person. Just verify that they're the person that they're claiming to be, that they match the photos that they're using, that they are in fact a Stony Brook student. So take some time to chat and get to know them. When you get to a point where you are meeting them in person, and again, I know that can be tricky for international students, but always you want to be meeting someone for the first time in a public space. I wouldn't recommend going to somebody's house to meet them for the first time. So just kind of like general common sense safety guidelines when you do start to interact with people online. But again, I'm really hoping that won't have to be a thing for much longer, because we're really trying to get this platform launched very soon.
I have found a place 20 minutes walking away, but as an international student, how would I know that walking 20 minutes every day is realistic? So yeah, we did talk a little bit about transportation and what that means, and we are not necessarily a very walking, I don't want to say walking friendly, but
yeah, I mean, I can chime in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds good on paper, 20-minute walk, but you don't understand the geography. We're surrounded by highways. It's not like you're walking, in a residential neighborhood on a sidewalk the whole 20 minutes. You're traversing most of the time, especially during the bad weather. The winters have been kind of mild the last couple of years, but you can't bank on that. Winters can be brutal. There can be anywhere from, a few inches to a couple of feet of snow on the ground at any given time. So it's really not the best, and it's very icy. So, it's summer, it's beautiful people right now, 20 minutes walking now would, you might be able to get away with it, but in February when there's, 3 inches of ice on the ground, 20 minutes turns into an hour real fast.
Right. I will also add to that, while some parts are residential, there are not a lot of sidewalks. Because it's in the residential areas, there are not streetlights walking. So once the winter hits and once daylight savings hits,
Dark.
it's dark after 5 p.m. And the other thing is that the bus system that we did send, you may have to walk 10 minutes just to get to the main road for that bus. So you will find that people, depending on how far they're living, really need to look at that bus route, as well as consider other modes of transportation. You will find people purchase cars. And I'm not saying that you have to do that, of course. But the further you live, those are what those options are.
Definitely.
We do have some students who choose to take an e-bike or a bike. Obviously that gets a little bit more questionable in winter when it's rainy and the roads are slippery. And we do have students who choose, because it's too expensive to purchase a car, to Uber. So those are some additional options that students take as well.
A question about, will there be more options added in the rental site?
So options there's two different things that you could look at on our website. There's the privately owned homes and apartments that you have to sign in with your net ID to look at, and then there's the list of commercial apartment complexes, which is available. You don't have to sign in for that. So the list of commercial apartment complexes is longer. The list of privately owned homes and apartments is kind of revolving. So we don't have like large bursts of these rental apartments because we are only accepting legal rental units. So what that means is that the folks who are listing on our website, we have proof that they have the rental permit. We know they've been inspected. We know that they're up to fire code, just kind of as a minimum baseline to protect our students. I'm not necessarily saying that apartments that exist that don't have that kind of documentation are always bad, but the university does not accept those rental listings. So that's the reason why it's kind of limited on that end. We do receive them throughout, kind of on a rolling basis, but to answer your question, it's not going to like explode with more listings in the near future. It kind of like we get, a small handful here and there. Some folks will end up renting the properties and then, those options will be removed. So it kind of is like creeps in and out on a rolling basis.
Okay. I think that is about our time as well today. So we want to thank you so much for joining us. Again, as questions come up, as you're looking at rental sites and leases and have questions, do of course connect with us. And we're super excited to welcome you in just about 6-7 weeks or so. And thank you again. Thank you to Vic and Michelle for joining us as well today. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.